Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the New York Knicks offseason because it was relatively uneventful in terms of a big move standpoint, but there are a lot of clues here to kind of tell us where the Knicks are planning on going from here, and I actually really like what they did this offseason, and more accurately, what they didn't do, which is typical Knicks stuff. But quickly before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload twice a day, every day, all throughout the NBA offseason, so if you're looking for a place for consistent NBA content, this is a great place to be. You can also leave a like rating on the video. It helps me out a ton, lets me know that you're enjoying the content, and gets it out to more people on YouTube as well. And you can hang out with me at various socials at the bottom of the screen outside of these videos. And with that said, let's go ahead and talk about the offseason for the New York Knicks. So we've gotten pretty accustomed to, on this channel and just in general, making fun of the Knicks and making fun of what they do or don't do in the front office, and the fact that they've been doing this whole max cap space thing for what seems like forever, and they always, miss out on the guys that they really want. But I think there's been a shift over the last, handful of months, really, towards a lot more intelligence in the front office there in New York in terms of what they're doing and really having a cohesive plan. So in terms of what they did this offseason, it's not like anything in particular that they did that's going to suddenly catapult them, into the upper echelon of the Eastern Conference. It's more so about just doing smart things. They drafted Obi Toppin in the draft. You can talk about, what you think he will or won't be for this group. Ideally, I don't know how likely this is, but if you're talking about an ideal scenario, he becomes this really nice stretch four that's athletic and slashes to the rim and has defensive potential. I don't know how likely that is for him. It could just end up being an undersized rim rolling five, and given some of the Knicks draft history, maybe that is what he ends up being. But still, you have that selection. You got some other young guys, and you got some guys in free agency as well that should provide at least some veteran leadership, some adultness in the room. We were talking about Austin Rivers and Nerlens Noel, kind of round out that rotation a little bit, and they turned a lot of just nothing into a handful of second round picks that can be used as assets as well moving forward into the future. But most notably, I think here, they didn't do the thing that the Knicks seem to always want to do, and that is spend their money in unnecessary ways throughout the offseason. We've seen it in the past with guys like Julius Randle, who is still on the roster, where it just doesn't make a ton of sense to be taking on money for these guys. And in the reverse this offseason, they took on other teams' expirings and money and got assets out of it rather than signing guys outright in free agency. So as we look now towards the future for this roster, all of the focus, of course, is on the summer of 2021, and that makes complete sense for this roster. I talked about this, it was however many months ago, where I kind of gave the Knicks report card for their season, and I talked about how they're really pointing towards this summer of 2021 being a huge offseason for them, and that has not changed. They're going to have a ton of salary cap space in that offseason. They can even buy out Julius Randle's deal in 2021 to make even more space for themselves. He's only guaranteed $4 million in that offseason of 2021, which would bring their salary cap space down enough, or up enough, bring their payroll down enough to bring their salary cap space up to be able to sign 2 max contracts in that offseason, while still having RJ Barrett and Mitchell Robinson on their rookie deals. Robinson will need a new deal in 2022, and Barrett will need one after that. But for the summer of 2021 specifically, they will have max cap space, in addition to having 2 future picks still from Dallas, that being 2021 and 2023 first-round picks from the Dallas Mavericks. Now, it doesn't seem like those are going to be any kind of crazy high draft picks, but still, that is extra draft capital, whether that be in a trade for a star or just to add more talent to this group. Now, I think there are 2 significant options here, obviously, where the Knicks can improve their roster around RJ Barrett and Mitchell Robinson, and those 2, of course, are free agency and the trade market. Now, as far as the trade stuff goes, they don't have outstanding individual assets to offer in a trade, assuming that Barrett and Robinson are not involved. We'll talk later about scenarios in which they would be involved. But without those 2 guys, you're basically looking at like Kevin Knox. You can include Obi Toppin if the team wants him. Frank Ntilikina, Dennis Smith Jr., Julius Randle if the team wants him, and then those extra picks and whatever future picks New York feels comfortable including in the deal. But the important thing here is if for some reason during the season there is a star that says, I don't want to be in my current situation anymore and I want to be in New York, they can trade for that player, assuming they can pile up the assets that they need in exchange for that player, and still have max cap space in 2021. And that's why it was important that they made smaller moves and moves that did not impact their 2021 cap space in this offseason, because that allows them the flexibility to acquire their 1 or their 2 stars in any way that they want to, rather than having to wait for that cap space in 2021. So if they need to, they have the assets potentially, depending on who the player is, to acquire someone with a bigger contract during this season while still having max cap space in the summer 2021, assuming the salary cap stays where we think it will for that 2021 offseason. Now, when you're looking at that 2021 offseason, the thing is, if they don't get a max player or they don't get a star via trade, there's not a whole lot that you're looking at here on this roster, assuming they buy out Randle, or even if Julius Randle is still there as a big expiring going into 2022. It's basically RJ Barrett, Mitchell Robinson. It'll be interesting to see what Barrett looks like in year 2 there in New York, and Robinson should continue to grow and develop as well as a really, really good complementary 5-man. And it's really going to be all about the growth and development of those 2 players, because in my opinion, there's really 3 ways that this goes for the Knicks. They basically can have either RJ Barrett or Mitchell Robinson, or both of them, have really good seasons this year, look like a promising team. They're not going to be able to push for the playoffs, in my opinion, regardless of how good those guys end up being, if you're being realistic with yourself. But, maybe those guys look good enough to push New York towards, being like the 10th best team in the East or something record-wise, something intriguing enough to create a Brooklyn-esque scenario from a couple of years ago, where it looks like a group that is starting to build something and could push towards a max player in 2021. And max players start to look at this as a more ideal scenario, not just because it's the Knicks, but because they're a competent basketball team and a competent organization, and that is such a critical threshold for them to cross. Now, another option, another way that this could go is they could be the Knicks. They could not be very good. RJ Barrett might not take that much of a leap. Mitchell Robinson could just still kind of look like what he did the year before. And at that point, you're probably looking at overpaying complementary options to bring in to surround Barrett and Robinson in the summer 2021, assuming that no max contract guys want to come to New York. And at that point, you're really, really betting on Barrett and Robinson to become like your franchise cornerstone type players moving forward, and then hoping for the best afterwards. And so again, a lot of this just revolves around how good Barrett and Robinson look this year. And then the third option, which is the crazy, wacky one, is if for some reason New York just becomes like the hub of all the max contract players, and there are 2 guys that want to sign there in free agency, and there's a 3rd guy that wants to go there via a trade. They could sign 2, and then they could trade for the 3rd guy, trading away Robinson and Barrett or whoever, whatever combination of pieces they wanted to bring in that 3rd star, and then you kind of go from there with those 3 guys. That is technically an option, even though I'm sure many fans in New York are not anticipating either Barrett or Robinson being traded from the roster in pretty much any scenario here moving forward for the Knicks. But regardless, even as crazy and as wild as all those scenarios seem, and given the history of what the Knicks have done in the past in free agency when they've had max cap space, which, spoiler alert, hasn't been much, the difference here is, 1, they didn't screw it up this offseason, they made smart basketball moves, and 2, they are starting to show the level of competence that you need to in modern NBA free agency to bring in max players. It's not just about the name anymore, it's not about the cap space. Plenty of teams have space pretty much every summer. But in a summer that looks to be as competitive as 2021, the Knicks are setting themselves up to look like at least a competent organization, which is a huge, huge step in the right direction for them. That's why I liked what they did this offseason, and it's why I like what they could potentially do in the summer of 2021. Now, which free agents are going to be available in that offseason, we will have to wait and see. How many of them will be willing to go to New York, we'll have to wait and see. But regardless, in terms of what the Knicks could have done realistically to keep their options open and keep that flexibility open, I don't know that they could have done much more than they did this offseason and that they did throughout the season last year as well, in terms of some of the moves that they made. They've got RJ Barrett, they've got Mitchell Robinson, they've got the promise of cap space, and it's still New York. It's still a place that a lot of guys do want to play at the end of the day, and they are leveraging that into a potential really good situation moving forward afterwards. There's no guarantee it's going to happen. It's the Knicks, and most of the time they strike out in free agency, but I still think that this is their best option, considering the fact that they haven't gotten like the number 1 guy in a draft. If they had gotten Zion, if they've gotten a high pick in this most recent draft, things might have changed for them, but they're certainly in position going into next year to have RJ Barrett, Mitchell Robinson, potentially another top pick in what's going to be a strong 2021 draft class, and 2 max cap space slots in the summer 2021. And even though I'm an Nets fan, man, I still think that the league is more fun when the Knicks are fun. And as much as it's been nice to make fun of them and root against them and, you know, say, oh, why did they do this and why didn't they do that in free agency and in these offseason and these trades. The league is more fun when the Knicks are good and when the Knicks are fun. So I'm rooting for them to do something in that offseason, and I'm really curious to see what they could potentially do in the summer of 2021. And they're doing good basketball things, so I have to give them credit for that. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.